Hello and welcome, my fellow modeling and tabletop gaming enthusiasts, to the Mediocre Modeler Show. Today we're coming at you with another painting tutorial, and this is how I like to paint my U.S. Marines for bolt action in Conflict 47. I kind of developed this based off of an article I found on the Warlord Games website, and I'll include a link to that article in the description down below. But I kind of modified it to use the paints that I, one, had on hand, or two, that I could easily get. Used to have a great hobby store in town, but a few years ago, new ownership took over. The current owner wanted to retire. He'd been at it for a while, so he deserved a good retirement, but the current owner is more in tune with the RC market and does not cater to the scale crowd or the railroad crowd nearly as much as the store used to. So there are so many gaps in the paint racks. So I basically got what I could that was close and made do with that. That's enough of my tirade on the local hobby shop. But we're going to do this in two parts. So the reason for that being is we've kind of covered a lot of some of the other stuff in my painting U.S. Army infantry video from about a year ago. Things like the weapons, boots, web gear, things like that. It's all pretty similar. The big difference between, Army infantry in World War II and the Marine Corps, mainly the fatigues as well as the helmet covers. So we're going to do this in two parts. The first part, which is what we're going to look at today, is going to be the Marine combat fatigue. So basically their combat uniform. And then the second part is going to be doing the frog pattern helmet covers, which are really not difficult to do at all. I mean, hand painting camouflage can be challenging, but this is not. It uses 4 or 5 colors in a wash. It's pretty simple. It's over a pretty small area, and it definitely adds a lot of visual interest to the models. So with all that being said, let's head on over to the bench and get started on painting some of these devil dogs. For our first step painting our World War II U.S. Marine, we are going to give his fatigues a base coat using U.S. Dark Green from Vallejo Model Color, number 73.893. And this is going to be obviously a multi-step process, but we're going to go ahead and get that base laid down. So I'm just getting my paint thinned a little bit here on the palette. Recently, I've switched to using a flat brush. So this is a 3mm or a 1/8 inch flat brush in order to just cover a little more ground. I find that I like to start by getting the skin painted. So the skin's obviously already done. His white t-shirt is already done. So then I'm just going to go ahead and start carefully laying down the base around any spot that's going to be up against another already painted part, which you can do pretty well with this flat brush, but sometimes if it's a tighter area, I will switch to a pointed round, which is generally what I paint with. But for doing larger base coats like these, which mainly is I airbrush the base coats on all my Solar Auxilia, so I don't have to worry about brush painting them. But with my historicals, I tend to, I guess not all of them, but with these guys I do, just because it makes it a little easier painting the skin tones and stuff. You can be a little bit messy at this stage still, obviously, but you don't want to get too messy. Just make sure you don't get any paint on any of the other areas that you've already painted. The nice thing about the Marines is a lot of them are modeled with their sleeves rolled up, so you don't have to do full sleeves, but then that's just extra areas of skin that you have to be careful for. And then these guys that are modeled with their t-shirts and dog tags showing, be a little bit more careful. Obviously, it's a little warm up here in the shop today. Up in the 80s this weekend. A little unusual for April, but we're going to be back down into the 50s by the end of this week, so it'll be just fine, about normal. I should have the fan on, but I wanted to keep the fan off for recording. So we'll go ahead and finish up getting the base coat laid down on this guy, and we'll be back for our next step. Now our base coat has dried of our U.S. Dark Green. So we're gonna kind of do our first highlight, which is a mix of our base dark green as well as green gray 7886. It's important to note I think there are two green grays or also a gray green, but we want 7886 for this particular application. In my notes I have it as a 50-50 mix, but I think it's actually should be closer to 2-to-1 in favor of the US dark green. But, you know, adjust to your tastes as you see fit. So get a little bit of water in there, get it just thin, just a little bit. One thing, Marines uniforms in the Pacific would generally fade out pretty quickly with all the sun and the humidity and everything. So we're going to be kind of looking at a little bit of a faded appearance here. So what we're going to do is basically we're just going to be kind of layering up all the higher points of the uniform. And for this, I've switched to a size 1 brush, good old pointed round. I'd use a size 2 if I had one that was in decent enough shape at the moment, but I don't. So we're gonna, again, just kind of focus on more of the high points, but we are gonna really kind of layer this up, leave some of that darker color in the recesses. So we're gonna be covering, you know, a fairly good deal of the uniform here with this mixture. You could, of course, always mix it up ahead of time and have some in a spare bottle, but I haven't done that. But you could if you wanted. And so we're just going to continue around on the uniform here. And just get as much of that painted as we can. And when I say as we can, I mean we're going to try and paint, you know, the whole uniform. Except for, you know, things that face the bottom are clearly going to be shadowed. You know, we're not going to worry so much about those. But yeah. So, of course, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and finish getting this layered on, and then we will be back for our next step. Our first layer is all dry now, so we're going to go ahead and do our edge highlight, and for that, we're going to be using the same color we used in our last mix. So we're going to be using Vallejo Monocolor Green Gray 70.886. Now, as I was working through the squad, I'm doing a 10-man squad of Marines plus a War Dog team, or a War Dog handler. I was getting, the way that I had the paint mixed up over here, I was getting different shades, and then when I ran out there and had to mix some more, I got the ratio a little bit incorrect. So I ended up doing it more of a 1-to-1 mix as opposed to 2-to-1, which I think turned out a little bit better, made it look a little bit more faded, so it's going to look pretty good. So we're going to just take that straight green gray, and I've already got some on the palette, and I've switched over to a size 0 brush for this. I mean, you could certainly use something larger, but for this, I'm just going to go ahead and use the size 0. And then we're going to start edge highlighting all of our edges. And again, really only concerned with the highest edges and just the tops of the folds in the fabric, not every little thing. And some angles are easier from than others. You know, I mentioned the brush size, just what I use. Some people say use the smallest brush you can get away with. I kind of tend to go more towards use the largest brush that you can get away with. It just feels like it's a little bit easier to use a larger brush if you can, just because it holds more paint. It makes it just a little bit easier. Less time that you have to go back to the palette for more paint. So again, we're just doing all of our extreme edges, pick out, you know, the buttons, things that might catch a little bit of light. Just go around and doing an all over good old fashioned edge highlight. So we'll get these edges all highlighted up, and then we'll be back for our next step. Now that our edge highlight is dry, we're on to our second to last step. So you can see there, we've got our edge highlights all over his uniform. So our second to last step is going to be an all over wash. For that, I'm going to use Athonian Camo shade, but you can use any green shade that you want to. This just happens to be the one that I have, and I use it for a couple of other things on this particular scheme as well. So I'm going to give that just another quick shake up. But this is going to be just all over the green parts of his uniform. So pretty quick and simple, but again, you always want to make sure that you're avoiding any of the areas that have already been painted. It's going to help just kind of give us a little bit more depth now that we've got some of those highlights and everything established. And of course, like I said, you can use any wash you like, but this is just the one that I use. I think it gives it a nice tone. So, yep, we'll continue. Go ahead, get this wash on, and then we'll be back for our final step. All right, now our wash is dried, so we are ready to do our last and final step. And for that, we are going to come back to our good old green gray 70.886, and we're going to mix that 3-to-1 with sky gray 79.89. We're going to end up with a fairly light green gray color, and that is going to be just for our final edge highlight on the very highest points of our uniform. So we'll go ahead, I don't want too much paint, and just get those highest points. That's all we're really concerned about. And we just kind of want to make it just a quick little, that's a little too much there. Yep, just a quick little highlight on just, that's twice in a row, George, come on. We'll just leave it with that. And we're just going to get those highest little points. So we've already done one edge highlight, so we're just getting those highest points again. I've said highest points about 6 times, but that's okay. Y'all know what we're doing here. This ain't y'all's first rodeo now, is it? Should be a fairly quick process. And then once we get some of the other colors in, it will kind of tone everything down a little bit. It'll be looking pretty good. So we'll just go ahead and get all these highlights on, and then we'll be back to show you the completed Marine combat fatigues. Our final highlight is applied. You can kind of see it is a little stark there, but that's the way we want it. And then when we get these other colors blocked in, it'll kind of tone it all down a little bit. But that's our Marine fatigues. Just for as an example here, we've got a finished Marine here. You can see how that really does kind of tie in with everything. And of course, in tabletop gaming scale, we are always trying to sort of overdo the contrast to make things a little more prominent. So there's one fella in a similar pose, all done, and then a second one. So you can see another example here, what those fatigues will look like when they get done. Or the miniature itself. Obviously, the fatigues are done on this guy. But then coming up in part 2, we're going to take a look at how I do this nifty frog pattern camo helmet cover. And that should be out before too long. So stick around and enjoy the show. Well, my faithful viewers, there you have it. That is how I paint the fatigues of my bolt action United States Marines. Hoorah! Pretty simple process. You got to custom mix a couple of colors, but that's not a big deal. But again, check out the link for the article on the Warlord Games website to see how they did it. And then you can kind of see where I kind of changed a little bit. But again, this was just, as you saw, this was just for the fatigues. And then we'll come back with part 2 where we do the helmet covers, which will definitely really kind of set things apart and make for really good looking model on the table. Pretty basic, but really good looking model on the table. So hope you folks enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching. If you feel so inclined, please like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, may your paints be thin, your brushes be pointy, and your dice be hot.